Hello, my name is David Barker of Creatus Media, and I'm here with Dr. Shana, and this is Ask Dr. Shana. Doctor, what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about complaining constructively, which is useful for whenever somebody in some company or other makes a mistake, does the wrong thing, overcharges you, doesn't credit you with a payment, seems to be charging for something that they originally said was free, whatever. And the thing is, this is how to do it so you get a result. You want them to change something. If they've overcharged you, you want them to revise the bill so that you're not overcharged. If they have neglected to acknowledge a payment, you want them to acknowledge that payment. You want them to do something which would be favorable to you. And that's why I call it complaining constructively. At the same time, you have to realize it is a complaint, because underneath all of it is the idea that somebody in that company made a mistake. So you are, in a sense, accusing them of being incorrect. So that is the complaint part. But you want them to change things.
I find sometimes that we do this with our friends. I mean, we make complaints, but we don't do it very constructively, and it just kind of continues.
Yes, and you don't want to have an ongoing dispute with your phone company or with anybody, really, because they get really wearing and it doesn't get you anywhere. So this is the part about how to get somewhere. Now, first of all, it has to be a complaint of something that does concern that company. If your cell phone company is overcharging you, it is of no use to complain to the store at which you bought the cell phone. They sold you a cell phone for whatever their usual price, which you consented to. And they're not the ones that are overcharging you every month. So you have to get straight, where did the mistake occur and whose responsibility is it to fix it? Now, some companies want you to talk to customer service, and some companies will make a distinction between customer service and the billing department. So go with whichever seems more logical or reasonable. Now, it can sometimes happen that you call somebody and you tell them what's wrong, and excuse me, and they respond with being short-tempered with you, being rude. Now, I would advise you to say something like, okay, I'll call back later. Don't make any comments about their rudeness. Just say, oh, I need to go. I'll call back later. Thank you so much. And, I'll call back this afternoon or tomorrow or whatever. and get off the phone, because you don't want a member of their customer service department thinking you are rude. And I think just about everybody, when they have a conversation that's not going very well, will always say, well, the other guy was so rude. And you have to have some empathy with the customer service people, because I have a relative who's worked in customer service for years, and she says some days you get one rude, disgruntled, nasty person after another, and it gets on your nerves. And the customer service departments of most companies don't give you a few minutes between calls to kind of get rid of that person's nastiness and start out nice again. So realize that the person may be a little bit titchy because of the last call. It may have nothing to do with you. And if your first attempt doesn't go very well, I would recommend write out the sequence of what happened in 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't necessarily say those numbers but so that when you call back, you are able to say, I bought a thingamajig for so much, and then at the end of the month I received a bill for so much, and keep going, because you don't want to be telling a story that to the customer representative is confusing, and he ends up with a feeling of, well, why didn't you say so? Because he didn't understand the sequence, or you didn't say it right, or whatever. And I would recommend, if you have an unfortunate encounter with a customer sales rep, most of these things can be handled in the next 2 or 3 days. Give yourself some time off. Cool down. Don't be hanging up the phone and immediately picking it up and ringing the number again, because you will have nasty tones of voice from the fact that you just spoke to somebody else who wasn't very helpful. Call when you are cool and not inclining to be nasty. You just want the situation resolved. Now, I'm going to make up a scenario that you bought something and you paid with a check, and the next month you received a bill for what you had bought, which you had already paid with the check. And the first thing to do in a situation like that is to call the bank. The bank likes to have the check number if you had it, but you can also say, I mailed the check on such a date, so maybe a week after, could you see if there was a check in the amount of, and of course you know exactly what the amount is because it's the amount on your bill, that was cashed. And they will tell you, perhaps, yes, it was cashed on, and you get the exact date. And so that becomes, and then they sent you the next month a past due bill for the same amount, which they had cashed the check for it, so, but it wasn't credited to your account, so you get a past due bill. That's the problem. And if you can say to the customer representative, the problem was that I paid with a check, it was cashed, but I then, in the next month, got a past due bill as if it were not paid. And you give them the name of the bank and the date it was cashed, and don't ever tell a lie. Don't say I'm holding the canceled check in my hand if you're not. But say, I could easily get the bank to send me a copy of the canceled check if that would help. But when you speak to the customer rep, you give him your name and address and account number or whatever else they want, and then you say, on this date I bought this item for the price including tax of so much. On whenever it was, you can get the exact date on the check from the bank. I sent a check in this amount to, and then you give them the address you sent it. It may be that there are many companies which have offices all around the country, and they may have given you the wrong office to send it to, so it went to the wrong place. So that's the problem. And this check, according to my bank, was canceled, was presented to the bank on such a date, and was deducted from my balance on that date. But the next month I got past due the same bill, and that's what I need to straighten out, because you guys have been paid what you were owed, and somehow it didn't get recorded on my account as paid.
Mm-hmm.
But you try and present it in sequence, because it's very annoying for the customer sales representative to, or the customer service representative to have you say, oh no, because I sent it before that, or please tell me the story in sequence, in logical sequence. You bought an item, you sent a check, it was cashed, but you got a past due bill.
I really like your idea that you said write things down before you call, because now you've got the sequence and you have it so you can look at it, and it also gives you time to do a little rehearsal, and you've kind of calmed down. You're not, when you get on the phone, you're calmer, and so you're not, trying to scramble and think of things and getting upset yourself. So that's a wonderful idea. I really like that. I've never thought of that.
Thank you. And it is also a good idea, when you have given your identifying date of birth, address, numbers, account number, whatever, to say, now I'm going to have to tell you a very short story, so that the customer representative is thinking I have to listen, and not thinking, well, she bought something, so why doesn't she get to the point, if you see what I'm saying. They are under a certain amount of pressure from their employers to handle X number of calls a day. And so they don't want a lot of extra stuff that doesn't belong. But if you say, I'm going to have to tell you a little story as to how the problem came up. And don't start immediately with, I've just received a past due bill for an amount I paid you last month. Because you need to build the sequence. He needs to understand the sequence. I bought an item, I sent the check was cashed, but the billing department didn't get the idea that I had paid the amount. Be patient and understanding with the customer representative. He may say, well, for that you need to speak to the billing department, since they're the ones that did not credit you with the check you sent. And you may say, well, I called them and they said that I should call you. You know, I want to speak to the appropriate person, but it's actually a fairly simple story. I paid with a check and my account was not credited with that amount. I personally used to have a lot of this kind of problem because I have a very frequent last name, and I have a very unusual first name. So my name is Shana Clark, and they would credit the check to Susan Clark, Shannon Clark, Cheryl Clark, Stephanie Clark, you know. Almost anybody whose name began with an S sound, Clark, got the credit because they had never seen Shana before, I guess, and they're just not used to it. But the main thing is to, and I think it's best to go through the story, because if you leave out that you sent the check on such a date, the man's going to say, well, you haven't paid for it yet, so of course you're going to get a past due bill. And I think having it written down in a sequence is a very good idea. You could say, I just wanted to call you to see if this is something we could clear up right away, or if that's not possible, I will ask the bank to send me a copy of the canceled check, and I will write you a letter explaining the whole thing. But if we could just find where the problem is and correct it, that's all we need.
Mm-hmm.
And take the attitude that whoever made the mistake, whether it was the people that received checks and they didn't credit your account, or whether it was somebody who gave you the wrong office to send the check to, or whatever, everybody makes mistakes, including you yourself. So don't be all wound up and superior and how dare you make a mistake and all that kind of stuff. That is not going to get you the result you want, because the person you're speaking to will say, oh, another chronic complainer, and may not even do anything with it. You want them on your side, and the way to do that is to say that you realize somewhere along the line there was a mistake, but it's better to say there was a mistake rather than one of you turkeys employed by the ABC company wasn't paying attention and made a mistake. You know, don't, and if you feel yourself getting upset again, I would say make your point with the person you're speaking to, and then ask him or her, how do we get this straightened out? Because, well, in my case, with my history of being mistaken for somebody else, what usually has happened is that someone else was credited for a payment which they didn't make, which I made. And I remember once when I was working as an intern in New York City, and I lived in an apartment which was owned by the hospital, so I had to pay my monthly rent to the hospital. One time I got, for 2 weeks' work, a paycheck of $6.47. So I immediately went to payroll and explained the situation, and I said, I have no food in the house, and I really don't want to starve over the weekend because somebody made a mistake. So could you please correct it? And she said, it's 4:45. I said, yes, so you better hurry up. She found that there was a Dr. Susan Clark who had not paid her rent in 2 months. So they took 2 months' rent out of a paycheck, but they took it out of mine because she was the next employee number in the list, and they took it out of my number by mistake. And I said, well, you know, you got 15 minutes to give me what I have earned as my paycheck. And the lady looked at me, and I said, you know, I really can't live a whole weekend on $6.47. So, and she went away, and she came back with a paycheck that said the right amount. And she came back at 8 minutes to 5. And I said, you see, you corrected it with 8 minutes to spare. Now, I don't think she's gone through and taken the 2 months' rent out of Dr. Susan Clark's paycheck yet. I think that might be something she'd have to do on Monday. But she satisfied me. And the thing was, I didn't get really angry with her. I didn't get really, you know, I just said, there's a mistake, because I always pay my rent on time. And when I said I don't have anything to eat at home, and I really don't want to starve through the weekend, her eyes changed, and she seem to realize this is a real human problem and she'd better straighten it out. Because she couldn't very well tell a young doctor, well, I don't care if you starve all weekend or whatever. I mean, she didn't want to go on record as saying that. But I find having the sequence and keeping to the sequence and having the exact date that you sent the check, if possible, the exact date that it was cashed, which you can get from the bank, and of course the exact amount, and vagueness is not in order here. And people will respond to that. But anytime you find yourself getting annoyed with somebody, say, oh my goodness, I've got to go. And I never make up the reason I have to go, but I let them assume, there's there's something cooking on the stove, or that it might blow over, or something major has happened. And for me, that works. And I sometimes even get a little note from the customer relations company saying, we're so sorry we did not do this correctly, and we hope you won't take that out on the ABC company, because we really are customer oriented and we want our customers happy, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's
so,
great.
That's it for today's, unless Mr. Barker has a question.
No, I think you went over things quite well, and I'm looking forward to a nice weekend and relaxing and getting together with some friends, because things seem to be getting a little better, I hope.
Yes, I've got an appointment with my hairdresser for next week. Fantastic. I've not been too happy with having to make webinars with my hair looking worse and worse and worse, but I sort of assumed you might understand. And I'll be very glad to get back there.
Very good. Well, I want to wish all of our viewers a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Indeed. So, I hope you come next week. I don't know what the topic will be. I need to sort of feel what people are talking about and what people would most like to hear about during the week, usually. I thought the one about constructive complaining can be used if you have problems because of coronavirus with owing people money, or even if you don't, everybody gets into some sort of business disagreement with people at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good idea, and the most important thing is to keep your temper, even if someone says something with a racist slur or whatever. Don't rise to it. Just keep going as if they had spoken normally. So, until next week. Goodbye.